A lot of the stuff that we have to contend with in the exchange rate market is unknown and unforeseen. But these are events that we know about ahead of time.
Yes, it's time for Coffee Break Commerce, your business and forex audio fix created by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Welcome back, listeners, to your favorite currency podcast, where we decipher and decode your economic and currency issues, all in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. Today's topic is seasonality of the rand. In other words, with a volatile currency like the rand, is there any sense to the ups and the downs, the ebbs and the flows, the value of the currency that seem to happen at the same sort of time every year? So here to help us understand this phenomenon is our FX man for all seasons, Mike Keenan, Principal and Head of Fixed Income and Currency Strategy for Absa. Hi, Mike. Welcome back.
Hi, Justine. Nice to be back on the show. Thank you.
Great. Well, let's dive right into this topic. Just to provide a bit of context, so we're recording in March, which over the past 10 years, as I understand, according to your recent publication, has been the third worst month for the rand over the past 10 years after May and August. So what's going on here? How can the same or similar depreciation or change in the rand occur at the same time each year?
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to the rand on a day-to-day, on a month-to-month basis, there's always going to be a lot of unobservable events, things that we don't know about beforehand. They crop up and have a material influence on the currency one way or the other. But there are certain events that happen characteristically in the same months of the year, year in and year out. And those are the kind of things that possibly could explain why the rand does perform better in certain months. You know, for example, during the months of December, the rand tends to do quite well because at the time, you know, South African economy kind of slows up and there's not a lot of importation of goods that normally takes place through the rest of the year. So what we tend to find is if importers are not going out and getting hold of, you know, dollars to pay their suppliers, the rand naturally doesn't have that weakening bias during December. And the converse is true, for example, for the month of January. So in January, after everyone has, you know, spent over the Christmas season, inventory levels are normally depleted, and then businesses have to restock their inventories. And that means then that has got to start importing goods again. And then that puts renewed pressure on the currency after the sort of the windfalls in January. And the same is true, I would say, in months of October. What businesses then tend to do is they also start to rebuild inventory ahead of the spending season. So there also is normally quite a bad month. Over the Easter holidays, it's another quiet period for South Africa. A lot of public holidays in sort of April and March. Those also can help the currency if importer interest is not very strong at that time. But to get back to what's happening now in March for this year, that has more to do with things like dividend and coupon payments that South Africa has to make to foreign investors. So we know that foreigners owe about 30% of our bond market. They also own 50%, if not a little bit more, of the equity market. So, you know, when those guys have to be paid their coupons and dividends that are owing to them, that money can often leave the country. Sometimes the money is reinvested, but more often than not, it actually leaves the shore. So for this March, we have got some sizable coupon payments taking place, and we've got quite chunky dividend payments. We've heard repeatedly how well the mining companies have been doing over the past few quarters because commodity prices have been, you know, very, very strong. And now it's time to sort of pay the pipers, so to speak. You've got to pay your shareholders, and those put strain on the exchange rate.
Okay, so you've mentioned that March and also May and potentially August are characteristically the months or seasons when these sort of weakenings tend to happen. And then December was one of the sort of areas of strengthening, but are there any others? And what other seasons of the rand should our listeners be watching out for?
So what we tend to find as well at the beginning of each quarter of the calendar year, so January, April, July, and September, at least October, what we see there happening is global investors tend to look at their portfolios and decide where they should invest. And often then they have to deploy money and investments into a whole host of emerging markets, such as South Africa. So, in April, not only do you have, things like Easter, which we said sort of often is support of the currency, but also there's sort of indiscriminate buying of South African financial assets and other emerging market assets, for that matter, by these foreign investors. And then we start seeing normally quite big inflows. And we've actually tied this in also to some of our bond market analysis. And we find that, for example, months like May is a month when those same investors are normally starting to take money off the table. So May and June, or in the run-up to the end of the quarters, they indiscriminately sell because they've got to sometimes, repay their shareholders or make payments on that side at the end of the quarter. So into quarter ends, the rand tends to do quite poorly. And then at the beginning of each quarter, new money comes in, and then the rand starts to strengthen. So, in the research department, we always try and just be very aware of these event risks, as we like to call them, because these are the kind of things that we actually know about ahead of time. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of the stuff that we have to contend with in the exchange rate market is unknown and unforeseen. But these are events that we know about ahead of time. And that's why we try and sort of caution clients, whether they're on the import side or the export side, just to position themselves accordingly. It's not to say that each and every time the dividends or the coupons or the importer flows will ultimately be the strongest force in the market. There can be countervailing forces. But, these factors do have an impact. And that's why I think clients need to be aware of them.
Okay, so any tips on what you think investors or traders or clients should do to manage these or to take advantage of these more seasonal fluctuations? I mean, should they be timing their trades and taking these into account? What would you say is a good practical takeout?
We think where possible, clients should be trying to work around these events. If they go in their favor, then of course you can take advantage of those developments and maybe stall your purchases or sales of foreign currency and vice versa. But, some clients unfortunately don't have that luxury. The imports and the exports come in as and when, and they can't control it. But if you can, it definitely does help, because normally on those days when there's big flows, there's also a lot of volatility in the market. So if you think about it from the trader's perspective, they're having to contend with these big flows coming in or out. And, then that's going to affect the pricing and the volatility of the market. If you are taking out things like derivative transactions, they'll probably become more expensive around these events. So be well aware of them. We always publish sort of key events to look out for. And investors and clients will do well just to try as much as possible to manage their exchange rate exposure around those key events.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think that just about covers what we can do for today's Coffee Break Commerce, created for you by Absa Corporate and International Banking. It's been great talking to you, Mike Keenan, again, and thank you, listeners, for joining our conversation. Please do keep talking to us. Send us your thoughts. Send us FX questions you'd like us to cover in future episodes. The email address to use is internationalbankingservices@absa.co.za. And please do share this episode with interested friends or colleagues. Join us next time for another Coffee Break Commerce.